Welcome to this presentation from me, Liam Price, an associate at the law firm Sheridans. It's really great to be supporting and presenting this as part of the Ukie Hub Crawl 2020 gone digital, and I hope that it's interesting and useful for you. As you can see on this first slide here, this presentation is about building your brand, why IP is your studio's most valuable asset in creating a unique identity, and we'll be focusing on your games company brand and your games brand, IP, and those areas such as trademarks. Moving on to the second slide here, just to give you a few examples of the kinds of companies that we're really lucky to support and work for as clients here at Sheridans. On this third slide here, you can just see a few examples of how, if the area of branding and IP doesn't go well, obviously it can result in a legal issue, but also just kind of bad PR and a PR issue for your company as well, particularly if your company grows and becomes very successful, like some of the examples show here. And then you are kind of vulnerable to these kinds of headlines in a way, and you would become a target. And so that's just another reason to be thinking about this. And in essence, I'm hopeful that some of the points we'll talk about in this presentation might help you, stop yourself from becoming one of these headlines in future. So what are we going to cover in this presentation? Well, the three main areas are 1, trademarks, 2, passing off, and 3, avoiding infringing third-party intellectual property, which I know you'll be really keen to do. And the real kind of gist of all of this is just making sure that you're putting your games company in the best possible position that you can from early on, and that you're kind of thinking about a lot of these areas. Moving on to why these areas matter now. If you spend a great deal of resource, time, cost, just effort, money, this is resource you could have been putting into development itself, on your brand, on your marketing, on building up your games company and building up awareness in the marketplace. The question then is, okay, that's amazing, but what is there that's stopping others from then just copying you and kind of taking advantage of all of your hard work and resource there? And that's where intellectual property comes in. It's one of your company's most valuable assets. It's something your investors or acquirers would look really, really closely at as well. And the point here is to really plan for the long-term success of your business, your games company, because if it all goes well and your game does fantastically well, like I hope it does for you, you want to then be in a great position to do a few different things, and they will include being able to exploit and make the very most of your rights and your intellectual property, and make it, in essence, as much money as you can from that, if that's your aim. And then also be in a strong position to be able to prevent kind of unscrupulous third parties who might be looking to take advantage of your hard work and stop them from copying or infringing. Coming on to our first kind of main section here now on trademarks. So what is a trademark? Well, a trademark is a sign to distinguish your business from other businesses. And it can be made up of lots of different things. It could be words, slogans, designs, letters, numbers. There are even trademarks out there for sounds and smells, although I expect that for most games companies that kind of area might not be that relevant for you, and you'll be focusing more perhaps on word marks and image marks. And you can just see here down towards the bottom of this slide on what is a trademark. You can see an example of a word mark there for Nike in the bottom left, and an example of a image mark there in the bottom right from Fresh Trading, and that's the kind of innocent smoothie logo there, just to give you two examples. The kind of areas that you might look at getting trademarked as a games company are just the game name itself, particularly useful if you're looking to kind of build a game franchise and potentially have sequels and things like that, but also just useful generally. A logo or a kind of branding for your game or your games company, if that's something that you've kind of built up. Just your company name itself, which of course could be just your game name, or it could be a slightly different name for your game studio or your publishing company, or the logo for that company, of course, as well. And then slightly more granular content like your character names. So if there was a character in your game who was, particularly important, key, the main character, and they were unique and had perhaps a unique name, you may well then want to look at whether you can get trademark protection for that character name in video games. And that would be great if it was something that you wanted to explore as well. Moving on now to how trademarks actually work. So this is a summary here, of course, but I hope it gives you the most helpful high-level points. Trademarks are registrable against classes of goods and services, and they're territory specific. So they're quite granular in that way. Having one trademark would not necessarily cover you for all types of goods, services for the whole world, and it wouldn't. Your trademark would be, for example, in a specific territory or region, for specific classes of goods and services. And so it's important that this area is done well. It's important that the classes of goods and services are what you intend to be covered. And there are some other kind of limitations to how trademarks help you as well, just to be aware of. So, for example, the trademark lasts for 10 years, but they are extendable. And so, I would expect that if you're managing your portfolio well, or if you have, for example, lawyers doing that for you, your portfolio and your trademarks would then be extendable and so may last beyond that period. And the trademark, in essence, works as a right for you to exclude other parties. So like that unscrupulous third party I mentioned earlier who might be looking to take advantage of your work, you can exclude them from being able to use the marks details that you've registered. So, for example, the word, if it's a word mark, for the goods and services class that you've got that registered for, and for the territories you've got that registered for. So you would have a right there if somebody infringes you in that way and infringes your mark, to potentially look at kind of enforcing that against them and preventing them from doing that if you can. Of course, if your mark and your business has a reputation in the UK, there may also be kind of similar parallel rights that you would gain as well, which could be useful for you, which might be helpful, again, to prevent kind of unscrupulous third parties from looking to, take advantage of your work, your mark, or act in a way that, would be kind of detrimental to that or to you. Moving on now to just some examples here of trademarks. You can just see two examples here. These are publicly available, through the UK's trademark registry, so you can see lots of examples there. These are both EU-wide registered marks at the moment, and you can see one is a word mark and the other is a image mark. And moving on to the next slide here, you can just see further details about those marks here, and you'll see, if you look closely on the slide there, you can see they're divided out by class. If you look in the image just towards the right there, and the class covers specific things. You can see class 9 there, and that just is coverage for computer games, software, programs, as you can see there. And the marks have also been registered here in these examples as covering other areas too. So you can see in that image on the far right, class 16 is also covered, printed matter, books. And one of the reasons businesses often look at doing that and covering different classes is because, you may well want protection which goes beyond just the game itself and covers other types of goods and services. So, if you want to, for example, protect your rights to be able to use this mark for comic books or other areas that might be important for your business, then that's something to take into account when you look at the classes that you'll register your trademark for. Moving on to the next slide now, there are a few points also just to keep in mind in regards to trademarks too. Really, it's a key point to consider prioritizing your trademark registrations, and I completely appreciate that. For lots of games companies, and in particular for indie games companies or those just starting out, you may well have limited budgets to allocate on your trademarks and on your legal side. And so you might just want to look at prioritizing your kind of trademark plan, taking a look at your key markets, and that might be where you're operating, where you have business partners, or where you just have customers, and where the majority of your customers are, which countries they're in, and then kind of building a plan then to prioritize which applications you do at which time, and that can help you kind of prioritize that over time and spread the cost of building up a great portfolio of marks for the business. If a third party begins using a mark before you register it, it's worth keeping in mind that that can present problems. And so the earlier you can get in there and get going with your application, generally speaking, the better. So that's just a point to keep in mind in regards to that. Moving on now to passing off here. And passing off really is a kind of an underpinning principle that can be really helpful where you've perhaps not managed to get a trademark registered, or you haven't been able to afford to do that at that stage, or maybe you have and you also want to look at passing off to protect you as well. Either way, it's in regards to your unregistered rights, so it can help you whether or not you have a trademark, which is great to know. And it requires that you have goodwill in your brand, your mark, your company, and that the public are misled and that there is a damage to you. It's difficult to prove and enforce passing off, so that's something, of course, to keep in mind. You will have to work through those steps in a great deal more detail, of course, if you're looking to enforce on this against another party. And so trademarks really are the better area to be looking at. Relying on and passing off, I would say, is to be seen as a kind of a helpful safety net, which would potentially be there for you as well. Either together with your trademark or as an alternative if you perhaps didn't manage to get one registered. Just one example here, you can see now on this slide, this is Rihanna on a Topshop t-shirt, I think, and there was a case a few years ago that you might have seen in the press on this, Fenty and Arcadia, which I think went all the way through to the Court of Appeal in the end. And in summary, Rihanna and her companies, I think, won that case because, in essence, there was a passing off of her as being connected to Arcadia and Topshop, and a risk of the public being confused that she was somehow endorsing or involved, or there was a deal in place when actually there wasn't, and her image was just being used without her permission there. And so that's an example of how passing off can work, where there wasn't a trademark, but this company was able to enforce their rights because there was a reputation there was a goodwill there was a confusion and a loss there, and so that was an actionable passing off example. Moving on from that, just to slide over to avoiding infringing third-party IP. And I know that you'll all be very keen to do that and to not infringe other people's IP. Needless to say, if you do, that can cause you a great deal of problems. And so just on this next slide here now, slide 16, you can see I've just set out a few points that I hope are helpful for you in terms of points to look at covering to try and reduce the risk of infringing someone else's IPs, their intellectual property. And these are quite basic points, but they can be really practical and helpful for you, I hope. And so just when you're starting out, with your new company, if you're at that stage, use an original name for your company if you can, and also an original name for your game. And obviously avoid copying somebody else or avoid being too close to somebody else in terms of the name they already have for their game. You want to build your own presence in the market is a kind of a good kind of general approach. And to help yourself do that, you can do some online research in advance of kind of making your business decisions about things like company and game name. And you can use tools like, I've got listed here with some links, just a company name search with the Company's House service. That's free. you can go on there, just type in the name that you're considering, see if anything comes up already for that name, and that should be helpful. Doesn't necessarily catch everything, but it's just a helpful tool there. Similarly, there is a register in the UK for trademarks, so you can use that second link there, gov.uk, /search-for-trademark. You can just have a look to see what other trademarks are there in that space. I think you can search by keyword there, so you can just see, is there something already there which is covering or is very similar to what I want for my company. That should be helpful for you. Also in the US, copyright is registrable there. Your copyright is registrable. That's different to England, of course, where it's an unregistrable right. But over in the US, people can register copyright, and so there is that searchable database there for you. I've set out that link there. You can potentially use that to see again, through that tool, if you can see anything that would indicate somebody's already using that mark or that image, that game name, company name, to just try and help avoid being too close to theirs or infringing theirs. And finally, there's just good old-fashioned Google searching that you can do there. Just look on Google, look on socials, and just see, is anybody else using this that I can see? I'm not suggesting you trawl through every single page on Google searches, but looking through the top results on that for a couple of pages could be really helpful, and I would expect might show up something which was popular and had the same name. Moving on from that then, and just onto the next slide now, slide 17, third-party contributors. So if you are using materials from third parties, either in your game or just as part of your game's business, it's a really important area to cover off for yourself well to again avoid infringing third-party rights of those contributors. A really common example that comes up for the games industry on this front is the use of contractors. And I would just add a point here that I don't think is on the slide right now, but I hope is helpful for you. There's a general rule under English law that, unlike for your employees, your contractors and your suppliers, in the absence of a written contract to the contrary with them that would say otherwise, the IP they create, such as their copyright and materials they might be making for you, there's an assumption at law that they would own those themselves, unless there was a contract or something written and agreed contrary to that. For example, a contractor agreement assigning that over to you. And so it's super important with those contractors and suppliers that, if the deal is for you or your business to own, that work, that IP, that needs to be agreed, set out, signed, and formalized so you don't encounter a problem with that. So I just wanted to flag that point for you, and I hope it's helpful. So coming back to the slide now on slide 17, if you're using a third party, so another common example is marketing materials, marketing agencies, those contributing sound, songs, materials like that. Questions to ask yourself can include, who is responsible for checking that these materials, are cleared and they're original and they don't infringe anybody else's IP? Who's responsible for that, and how is that set out as being, that person, company's responsibility? And then it's just secondly there, what is the IP ownership for those materials, for those assets? And again, I think I've actually covered it in that point there. Same point as I mentioned before with contractors, and just to reiterate, contractors, suppliers, not your employees. The assumption is they retain the ownership. And so, if the deal is to the contrary, it's really crucial to get that set out then and signed, such as with a contributor agreement. So moving on now, slide 18. So the worst has happened, and you receive a mail, a letter, an email, a message from a third party or from a contributor saying that you've infringed their IP. Okay, that is a serious thing, but take a deep breath and don't panic. It's important to deal with it calmly and in a measured way. I would suggest do seek legal advice if you're at that level and you're worried and you're receiving allegations like this from somebody. do try and limit your communications with that third party. Sometimes I do see WhatsApp messages, Instagram messages, things like that, and you can kind of in a way dig a bit of a hole for yourself and make things worse, even when you might not have actually done anything wrong. And so it's just good to be really measured and careful with your communications when something like this comes up with that third party, and perhaps seek legal advice over those communications, emails, messages and responses before you go back to that third party. Just gather all the relevant information together. I mean, that might seem obvious, but it will save everybody a bit of time, and it would be something I would ask you for, if you came to me or to Sheridans for some legal help when something like this comes up. We would just ask, can you send, all the information, documents, emails together in one go, and we can have a look through and see what's there. And so just getting all that together is a great early step to do, and can help you also get your head kind of wrapped around kind of what's happening. And then just finally, how valid are their claims, their allegations here? And it might well be perhaps that just something has happened unintentionally, something was included that wasn't intended to, or you didn't know they had the rights that they're alleging they have. And so it might be the case that there is something to address. And so again, it's important to seek some legal help on that kind of thing. And I and Sheridans can do that if you chose to come to us with that. Moving on then to slide 19. Just some examples here again of, what happens if there is a problem in this kind of area with infringing third-party IP. And the first example on the left, WB in Bethesda, and this was a public example. You may have seen some press reporting on this, and my understanding of this matter was that there was a misuse by an agent company, someone who was subcontracted, kind of engaged to work on the games, who had kind of misused their work and applied it in fact to both games, to do two different companies. And so there was a problem there to resolve, and obviously that reflected badly on everyone involved and caused a great deal of stress, I'm sure, to all the companies involved with that. And so, if that could have been preempted early on with perhaps checks and balances and contracts put in the right way, and perhaps that might have helped to try and avoid that, perhaps. And the second example there, Take-Two and Pinkerton there. This is one of my favourite examples. So this is in relation to the game Red Dead Redemption 2 that you might have played. And in that game, the Pinkerton Detective Agency do feature in there. They are actually a real-life detective agency. They have a long kind of history going back, kind of decades, if not hundreds of years. And they have certain registered rights and intellectual property rights of their own, which I think do include trademarks. And so, as I understand it, they just weren't happy with the use of their rights, IP, and how they were represented in the game, and so sought action against Take-Two. This has all been reported in the press, so you might have seen some of that. As far as I've seen, that action is kind of now on hold between both sides. Again, similarly, nobody comes out well from this kind of dispute, and it's not what anybody wants. And so, to the extent you can avoid this kind of thing by looking at the steps that I've spoken about earlier, getting deals set out in contracts where you can, to be super clear, doing checks for pre-existing rights that other third parties might have before you use content or make references. All of those checks will be helpful for reducing the risk of kind of becoming one of these examples, becoming one of these headlines, as well as, of course, the legal risks as well. Moving on now to just some final tips on slide 20 here. So just to reiterate again, paying close attention to your IP and your intellectual property now can really save you problems later on. And it can also just have the real upside of increasing your business valuation. And I would expect that, an investor or an external acquirer or even a games publisher who's looking to engage with you, will be paying close attention to what the IP position is for your business, at the very least wanting that things are cleared and that you do own kind of what you're saying you own. And also just looking to see with keen interest, what's the value in your business, and as part of that valuation, your IP, your trademarks, the different things you own will kind of form a part of that kind of number. Just secondly, a practical point here, something I kind of occasionally see come up. Register for your web domains, so your website domains and your social media handles early if you can, because there are unfortunately unscrupulous people out there who might look to take an opportunity of any gap left by you. And a common example of how this can go wrong is if you announce your game or you publish your game and it goes really well, but you haven't got your game's name's domain name or your social media handles registered, and so there's a gap. Some unscrupulous person might see that as an opportunity to get in there and register those URLs or domain names, and that can be a real problem for you when you come to kind of look at taking those up for yourself, for your business. So if you can get all that done and get your digital real estate into a good position kind of before things go public, that could be really helpful, because dealing with that cyber squatter issue afterwards can be quite challenging and expensive, and you would incur potential legal fees with that as well. Finally, don't forget about video games tax relief and R&D tax reliefs as well. If you haven't already explored those, they're not really the focus of this presentation. But if you need help with those areas or just want a summary of what they are and how they work, just get in touch with me or with anyone at Sheridans in the games team, and we would love to help explain how that works for you, because it's super important for your business, for your games developers business, and can really be invaluable for you financially. So super important to keep in mind. And that's it. And as this presentation is digital, there isn't really capacity for questions, but what I would say is, just email me or Sheridans Games if you do have questions or need a bit of help on something, and we're always willing to just be as helpful as we can, or have a chat with you about what you're working through, and we just love to help, really. So just let us know and get in touch. And I hope this presentation was useful. It's an absolute pleasure to be involved with Ukie and supporting the Hub Crawl. And thank you so much for listening and watching. Bye.